My name is Dan Angus. I'm a Professor of Digital Communication and Director of the Queensland University of Technology's Digital Media Research Centre. I'm also a Chief Investigator in our ADM+S Centre. I'm joined by a fantastic panel of my colleagues, also ADM+S members, Dang and Tim, for this next session. I'm not going to do too much of a preamble here, just in the interest of time, but I'll pass straight over to Tim. I think you're first, is that? Yeah. Tim first to... We'll soon find out with the slides. Tim first to open up this next session. This is going to be a fascinating dive into some more of the infrastructures and a lot of more, I would say, contemporary work that's being done, particularly in the ADM+S Centre, around the issues of pertinence today. So we're going to hear 2 10-minute presentations and then have plenty of time for questions and answer. So over to you, Tim.
Right, thank you, Dan. This is us again. All right, so I'd like to begin quickly by showing you this image. Just out of interest, just a small raise of hands. Is anyone familiar with this? Has anyone seen this before? I wasn't expecting that many hands actually. So this is an image of a young child, fleeing during the Hurricane Helene. Very distressing, holding a puppy, very emotionally resonant. And as many of you probably already know, it's not a real image. It's not actually a photo. This was an AI generated image that was circulating across multiple social media platforms in September and October during the event. And I think that this image to me is kind of a really interesting index into a number of challenges that I think have been raised this morning already. And I think one of the key things that I'd like to talk about here is the relationship that AI-generated imagery has to what we think about as truth. And I'm calling to attention here really quickly some of the viral posts that were sharing this image. And so, for example, Republican National Committee member and activist Amy Kremer had shared a post originally with this image saying, this picture has been seared into my mind, my heart hurts. And then about 45 minutes later had become aware that there was some kind of contestation, if you like, about the provenance of this image, that some people were saying it was fake, some people were saying it's AI generated, etc. Then had replied with another post where she basically doubled down on it. And I think that this post was very interesting. And I think it's a kind of exemplary of some of the challenges that we're facing, where basically Kremer has said, "Y'all, I don't know where this photo came from, and honestly, it doesn't matter." And I think what this post raised to many of our attention is 2 things. One, yes, we could look at this through the lens of myth and disinformation. We can look at it through the lens of propaganda. This image was being used to support narratives leading up to the presidential election, that Democrats couldn't be trusted, that people in some of the states worst affected by the hurricane were being ignored by Democrats, that funding from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, from FEMA, was being misspent, and so on. But the thing about it is, all of those claims, the propositions that those claims were making, are embedded in this multimodal imagery. These are not claims that can necessarily be extracted from sentences. They are not formulated in language, but are embedded deeply within the sort of semiotic field that imagery and video are showing. And one of the key issues is that we have a situation here where even when people know that something is very likely to be fake, it doesn't even matter. And I think that we should really pay attention to that. I think that's really telling. I think it really is an index into our time. Now, I think one of the great thinkers of our time, George Costanza from the show Seinfeld, I always come back to this, and I've been increasingly coming back to this scene in Seinfeld over the last 10 years, but it's really coming to the fore. There's a situation in a Seinfeld episode where Jerry Seinfeld has to lie on a detector test. I won't get into the reasons for that, but he has good reason that he needs to lie, and he doesn't know how to get around it. George Costanza, in all of his wisdom, says to Jerry as he walks out of the diner, "Jerry, just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it." And I think that this question about what truth is kind of coming to the fore as we're trying to deal with the explosion of AI-generated imagery. These are classic age-old questions. I've been given 10 minutes today to try and lob some provocations out here and try to cover something that I think we could spend 10 days. I could sit here from 9 to 5 and talk about the history of truth. I'm writing a book on this at the moment called The Architecture of Truth, trying to understand truth's operation, its nature. I'm saying that because I'm really keen to have a conversation with people about this. But when you look at the history of this, I mean, if we go all the way back, you know, even to Plato, well, Socrates through Plato was trying to ban poetry, right? You know, you read in the Republic, you know, Plato is arguing, and that's not the only text in which he talks about this. There's a major issue with truth. We can't let the poets go in and start saying all of these things, the structure of what they talk about, the music that they use. You know, we want to use particular modes of that. You can't use the Mixolydian, you can use the Lydian. He really thought that there was an issue here and had proposed to ban poetry in order to protect what he thought about as truth or as virtue, if you like. And philosophers have been talking about truth for a very long time. Here I'm just going to focus very myopically on some of the latest work over the last 20 years in the field of epistemology and metaphysics. You know, what are philosophers talking about in terms of truth today? And I think it's really telling that when you look at how we think about, or how philosophers think about truth today, it's through this notion of like truth pluralism, right? So I think that very often the long and short of this is that we often think about truth through in a sense, a kind of Aristotelian correspondence view of truth, where truth should be what really is happening out in the world. You know, the truth is something that should correspond to a fact that is out in the world. And I think there's really good reason for that. And I think the speakers this morning raised that to our attention in a really prudent way. But unfortunately, fortunately, truth is plural. In many contexts, in ethics, in religion, in the consumer world, truth operates in a number of different ways. And I think, you know, when we talk about like the architecture of social media, look at what came before Facebook and Twitter and so on. We had like Yelp and TripAdvisor and Amazon. These web spaces were designed, the very architecture of these spaces is designed to make what some rando on the internet thinks about some vacuum cleaner useful information for you, right? The magic of the architecture of these platforms is that it transmutes, you know, the wisdom of experiential knowledge, you know, your opinion, if you like, into something that can be seen to be, in a particular context, an objective, useful, pragmatic form of truth. You know, this product truly is great, and I'm going to feel amazing after I buy it for 5 minutes. And so I think, you know, there's a lot of literature around this, and I've had the great fortune to have spent the last couple of years really reading into this and trying to understand some of the sort of foundational concepts, you know, that underpin things like misinformation or disinformation, which nominally are often defined as like false information spread unknowingly for misinformation, or false information spread with the intention to deceive. But what do we mean by true and false? How do you know that something's false? And I think that that one of the issues that we have is that the very design architecture of social media is not and never has been geared towards the correspondence property of truth. This is one of the challenges that we've had, and it's good in some contexts. It helps us buy things. It entertains us, maybe, but in many other contexts, it's failing us. And I think that it is creating a condition of crisis. And I'll give you an example here just to make this a little bit more concrete. Take, for example, you know, a proposition or a truth claim like the development of autonomous robotic soldiers is a necessary advancement in warfare. Now, as a proposition about the world, as a claim about the way that things are, this can be evaluated along a number of different pathways. And I don't really have time to get into this, so I'm going to kind of skip along a little bit here. But you can see that the challenge increasingly is navigating the plurality of truth and sort of almost fighting against or trying to wrestle with the architectures of social media that very much privilege a certain mode of that. And what I'd like to kind of finish on quickly here is just going back to the US presidential election, a little bit of analysis that I've been doing with colleagues at the DMRC, tracking the Stop the Steal 2024 campaign. So the election fraud and election interference narratives that popped up again just before the election. And what you're looking at here is the volume of posts on X from 1st of August right up to, I think it's about the 8th or the 9th of November, just after the election finished, of 6 key hashtag campaigns that related to this kind of Stop the Steal 2.0 2024 campaign. And you can see that it kind of bubbles along and it's slowly increasing, and then it just sort of ramps up massively right at the end, just before the election date. And what's really telling, I think, about this is a question about the way that X and other platforms as infrastructure is enabling people to mobilize around what they think to be truth is, right? It may not be truth in terms of correspondence truth or factual truth. You know, if one proposes that, you know, the election was stolen or that Democrats shouldn't be voted in. But I think that AI-generated imagery had completely reconfigured the way that this campaign occurred. And tellingly, you know, if we ask the question about, well, you know, how genuine is this as an inquiry about election fraud? You can see straight away that as soon as the election was declared won by Donald Trump, it just basically dropped off the charts, and these campaigns just stopped completely. The infrastructure was not being used anymore to put forward this narrative. But I think one of the really tricky things that I'll end on here is the issue that we have when so much of the way that people are constructing truth about and trying to make sense of the world is bound up in images, and increasingly AI generated images. I think that this poses a real difficulty because it's really difficult to be able to fact check this. Where do you even begin to verify and fact check images that are clearly shaping people's beliefs and the way that they make sense of things? And we saw what the election outcome was. Cool. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to invite Dang up to talk about phone farming.
Sound check. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Dang Nguyễn. I'm a research fellow here at the RMIT node of ADM+S. So today I'll be presenting findings from my ongoing fieldwork on phone farming in Southeast Asia, focusing on 2 main goals. So the first goal is to introduce to those of us who might not be familiar with this practice, just what this practice looks like and why we should care about it. The second goal is to put forward my conceptualization of this practice as sort of a guerrilla infrastructure that can be activated for a range of purposes, including influence for hire or coordinated inauthentic behavior in platform parlance. I think studying phone farming can teach us a great deal, not just about how platform economies function in a global context, but also about the broader trends in the commercialization of the internet. All right, so what does a phone farm look like? So this is what a typical classic type phone farm looks like in Vietnam. And I'm guessing this is what most of us have in mind when we think of an imagery of a phone farm. So rows and rows of phones stacked alongside each other to automate a specific task, such as, for example, artificially inflating social media metrics. Now, visually, they're quite impressive. They're kind of a visual spectacle that blurs the line between dystopia and banality, really. Western audiences, I think, in particular, are drawn to these images as a symbol of the dark side of the internet, right? So a place where digital manipulation happens in distant, unfamiliar places. So in other words, a kind of spectacle of otherness. But in 2024, an operational phone farm looks more like this. So this is called a box phone farm. In this iteration of phone farming, we see that the back covers, the screens, and the batteries of individual phones are removed, and leaving us with only the motherboards, which are then stacked together in a box. Now, these phones are then centrally controlled with bespoke software using a PC. Why would they do this, you might ask? Well, phones aren't actually built to be run 24/7 with such intensity. So either the batteries would overheat or even explode sometimes, or the screens would start having discoloration from overheating. So this setup is is conducted in that sense to optimize their performance, but also to bypass platform bot detection at the device level, because platforms do sometimes look for unusual power consumption patterns, such as if the batteries drain too quickly, which could then indicate automated or malicious activities. Now, phone farming has really matured, not just as a practice, but also as a sector. So phone farmers today have multiple revenue streams, and setting up the most efficient hardware arrangement is a key part of their success. The hardware that you choose really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So different configurations are tailored to different needs. On the left, I have a screenshot from a website in Vietnam that sells pre-built phone farming setups. You can see that there are a lot of zeros on those prices, but remember, they're in Vietnamese money, not dollars. These setups are designed to be plug and play, so you can use them straight out of the box. An 800 Samsung Galaxy S8 kit, for example, includes all the essential tools to complete a range of tasks like crypto mining or social media engagement hacking. Cheaper options like the S7 at $700 or the J7 at $500 cater to more specific needs like lighter gaming hacking or lighter social media hacking. Now, as you can imagine, hardware building has become an incredibly competitive space. So as of November 2024, the latest iteration of phone farms contains only the motherboard that connects all components like the processor, the memory, and the storage. So completely doing away with even the phone frame. Beyond being sort of aesthetically sleek and space saving, I suspect that many phone farmers have probably found alternative uses for these phone frames. So in this part of the world, namely Southeast Asia, there's a really strong scrap culture where electronic discards aren't really seen as waste to manage, but actually material brimming with potential. All right, so that was hardware. What about software? So many of the hardware builders also sell software subscription. So you don't even need to have programming skills to start your phone farming operation. On the screen here is an example of a semi-automated software where you can manually control individual phones to be doing different tasks on different platforms at the same time. So for example, streaming music on Spotify in this case. Another software option is to automate the entire workflow. So like the one we're looking at here. So this is a screen recording of a phone farmer in Vietnam who's trying to give a demo of how his software works with TikTok. So each screen represents one individual device. You can see that he's doing this while fielding client question on the bottom right there. So the software can automate many tasks. It can solve captchas. As we've seen there, it can log in with account details. It can swipe videos, configure app settings, and so on. Now, fully automating your workflow actually isn't always the best option. It really depends on the outcomes you're aiming for. So for fully automated setups like this, they're really good for what's often called bot breeding, where accounts simulate authentic user behavior over extended periods of time, sometimes up to 2 years. So for 2 years, these accounts would do nothing but browsing and engaging in app functions. Why do they do this? Well, this creates a usage history that allows these accounts to then be traded at a premium when they eventually activated for a specific campaign. All right, so what does all of this mean, and how should we make sense of phone farms? You'll forgive me for invoking Latour here. So when Latour remarked that technology is society made durable, what he was articulating was a way to account for technology and society at the same time, rather than treating them as separate and independent entities. Technologies are not merely tools, they are embodiments of social relations. So they allow society to achieve durability by embedding values, norms, and structures into physical objects. It seems to me that phone farms are the social relations between people, hardware, and platforms made into durable forms. And these durable forms in turn configure the social relations that we have and how they evolve over time. I think it's more useful to think of phone farms not just as a glitch in the matrix, but rather as a form of guerrilla infrastructure that's quite robust and resilient. and that which reveals, I think, something much more fundamental about our global platform economies. The point of such a guerrilla infrastructure is not to destroy democracy per se, but to outlast platforms that come and go, and also to evolve alongside emerging business models of the web. So now, this of course has tremendous implications for our information environments. We often worry about influence for hire, which is the covert, inauthentic, coordinated and outsourced online influence that individuals and firms engage in to manipulate public opinion, to amplify specific narratives, or to promote agenda on behalf of clients. Now, platforms often label these activities as coordinated, inauthentic behavior, with authenticity, of course, defined by platforms' technical ability to index foreign activities against individual user actions. And from the perspective of a platform, this is what matters the most, creating legibility through a system that uniquely maps the behavioral log of an account to the actions of a single identifiable user. But when you're seeing like a gorilla, it's this very systems, this simplified representation of what it means to be a human user that you aim to disrupt. And by blurring the distinction between a bot and a human, you expose and exploit the vulnerabilities in platforms' reliance on these highly abstracted forms of knowledge. And in doing so, you don't just bypass the system, you actually destabilize it entirely. And I'll end very shortly after this. So what does this suggest about the future of our information environment and the study of platforms? I think it's no longer sufficient to demand transparency from platforms through self-disclosure regimes. If we want to understand what's happening, we need to move beyond studying isolated cases of contentious misinformation or technical diagnoses of amplification and inauthentic behavior. I think we must strive for a more comprehensive understanding, so one that considers how automated communication is shaped by the broader political economy, how evolving technological practices across diverse contexts are impacting our information environments and also the regulatory environments in which media industries and systems operate. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Fantastic presentations. Thank you both so much. I learned a lot. I guess for Tim, I really appreciated your view on truth and the kind of epistemological untangling that you think needs to happen. And I'll hold you to that because in one of your final slides, you said, look at all this activity drop off. What do you think that means for its authenticity? And you left that hanging. I thought the answer implied was that it wasn't authentic, but I was wondering if you could challenge that assumption, because if I thought my guy was out, I would stop hashtagging if he got in, right? So just how do we measure that authenticity if those are the kind of truth claims we have to worry about? And I'm still processing phone farms. I think they're super interesting. I will follow up with you after. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that you raised that because for me that's kind of the question that I was hoping to discuss, really. And not to excuse myself from providing an answer to your question, but I think that the challenge that we have is we sort of have two quantities. We have people who are sharing, AI-generated imagery and all sorts of other content. Who, when you really spend like thousands of hours studying this and looking into it, and then you listen to what they say, like Amy Kremer's, post, for example, I think is really indicative of that. It starts to make you. This is what made me wonder about. Well, what is the truth? To the claims that they are making, right? What framework of sense making are they? I shouldn't even say they. Are we as a people, but in this case, Republicans using? And there's a mismatch, I think, to your question between what people appear to believe, and the kind of not even beliefs, but the commitments and the convictions that they have, that they express using, AI-generated imagery, but everything else as well, versus, what we see in terms of like big ticket meta narratives like Stop the Steal campaign, where basically there's this like cataclysmic drop off in terms of interest. Now I guess I can throw it out there. You know, one hypothesis is that basically the truth, if you like, from that coherence or pragmatic perspective is you run a Stop the Steal campaign every election, right? Every election that comes along, you use the infrastructure that you've got available and you run some kind of campaign like that to contest an election that you believe should not be won, right? On the basis that Democrats can't be trusted, that the system is corrupt, and every other kind of statement or proposition that you have. And I don't have any answers here, but I think that the question that I'm wrestling with here is under what are the frameworks of truth that are in operation, right? And to what extent do they reflect genuine inquiry? And I think from a more practical perspective, what do we do about this, right? Like, where does that leave fact checking when you have images that are being shared that clearly shape people's beliefs? They clearly are being shared to support certain narratives. But I'm just going to put it out there. I mean, it's immune to fact checking. There's not a proposition embedded in an image of a little girl, you know, like distressed, that can be easily verified or not with a lot of work. So I think that it's like, to me, the question is these infrastructures appear to afford Stop the Steal type campaigns to mobilize people based on ideology, on the kinds of truths that philosophers talk about. But then you got the other truth, right? Correspondence truth, factual truth that matters for if we want to keep having democratic elections, enough trust in institutions to run those. And really, I sort of threw this out because I didn't have enough time to kind of get into it, so I'm going to excuse myself there. But I think also just to raise the question about what do we do with that mismatch of where the data says one thing, do they really care about election fraud, or is it some kind of other sense making in operation that we're going to see go skyrocket every 4 years in the US and maybe next year in Australia? So really, no answer to your question, sorry, but that's the challenge I think I'm wrestling with. Yeah.
I'll go to Alex.
Hi, it's kind of a follow-on, and I hope it's not a mean question. In the last presentation, we saw the data that everyone in the world is skeptical. We don't believe anything anymore, and then you've just shown us yours. I just wonder if you think that the technology can be used to increase our trust. Have you started to think about the ways we could use it for good rather than for evil?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like a kind of concrete way to get into this is to talk about some of the features of social media that I think are promising. And so I'm going to put my cards face up on the table here. That post that I showed of Amy Kremer, both the original post and the reply where she had doubled down on it, both were, if you like, fact-checked by Community Notes, which was, so Community Notes, for those who aren't familiar, is this sort of crowd-based sort of context adding, or if you like a verification kind of feature. And I'm going to say, like, in this case, I think it's an example of the kinds of like design features and design architecture that we should be pushing towards, right? It's not perfect, but it's so much better than than other approaches, because I think what we have is a situation where some people are doubling down, some images are circulating, maybe people believe them, maybe people find them useful, we don't know. They say they do, they don't care where it comes from. But at the same time, we've got, we're trying to fact check and verify things. And I think that the fact that both of those posts received a community note, even though you need a real diversity of like users in order to get it live, is to me actually a really promising sign. And it really shows to me like the power of the design of these spaces, and the fact that we talk about regulation, right? Well, one approach to regulation could be to look at the way that they function, right? How is the product design? And clearly it really works well in particular ways and doesn't work well in others. I think embedding these kinds of verification systems, even though if you look at the literature, it's like, okay, it doesn't really work well for political stuff and so forth. I think it's like by far the least worst and pro-social and potentially pro-democratic change that we can make is to sort of lean into that, because it does seem to be a little bit of an antidote, to the epistemic like challenges that we're facing here. Yeah. No worries.
In the interest of time, I'm going to have to cut this short. Sorry. I will ask one final question and take chair's privilege. If I can ask a question of you, Deng, for the phone farms and you're talking about, this is all in context of Vietnam. Am I correct? Yeah. Is there evidence of transactions kind of happening between Western countries and others with kind of, utilizing these services like in the broader kind of economy of this. Also, is there evidence of phone farms like what you're showing there being imported into like physical locations like Australia, the United States and others?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a global trade. The hardware that we saw in the presentation, they're being built so that they can be sold around the world. And many of these phone farmers brag about selling them to Europe, to Africa. So it is a global trade. In terms of software, you notice that the first semi-automated software option is actually a Chinese software. And then, of course, it became really competitive. And so there are other software options that came into play. But yeah, absolutely, both the hardware and the software components of phone farming, it's a global business.
Yeah, and I did the conversion. It's about 300 Australian dollars or about 200 US for one of those 30 unit kind of units. So pretty cheap hardware, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fab. All right, we'll call it there.